A black billionaire woman is targeted and arrested by an abusive cop just for her presence, a simple act of existing in a place he decides she doesn't belong. Unbeknownst to him, his actions will trigger a chain of events that will unravel secrets, not only of her life, but also of the systems that have consistently denied people like her justice. The sun cast a warm, mellow glow over the city's bustling streets as Layla Kane, that billionaire woman, sat alone, reflecting. Dressed in jeans and a sweatshirt, she looked as ordinary as anyone on their way home from work, but beneath her simple attire lay a complex life shaped by trials and triumphs. Layla had come from hard beginnings in a neighborhood where every day was a struggle, yet she'd risen above it, becoming one of the city's most influential leaders. She found quiet moments like this rare, a chance to pause in her busy life. The stillness didn't last. From the corner of her eye, she saw a man in uniform, the sound of his heavy footsteps bouncing off the brick buildings lining the street. Her gut tightened as he walked closer, his eyes narrowing with a hardened gaze that didn't need words to convey what he thought of her. Officer Barnes was known around these parts, his reputation marred by whispers of mistreatment, overreaching, and a general disdain for those who didn't meet his narrow definition of belonging. He stopped before her, a sneer on his face. "You think you can just sit here?" he asked, his voice laced with disdain, tinged with something darker. Layla held his gaze, choosing silence over confrontation. She knew this type. They fed off defiance. She'd faced enough in her life to know how to gauge a situation, but she also wouldn't be cowed. Barnes looked her over, his gaze dripping with contempt as he took in her casual clothing. "This is a decent area," he continued, voice steady with scorn. "Not a place for people like you." Anger flared within her, but Layla remained still, pressing her hands against her coat to keep from showing the offense she felt. She had worked her entire life to secure her place, but that look in Barnes's eyes reminded her of every unjustified judgment she'd ever faced. She answered evenly, "I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm just sitting here for a moment." She saw his jaw clench at her calm response. He leaned in, his voice a growl. "You don't get it, do you? I say what's right and what's wrong here." His gaze hardened. "And people like you don't belong here, sitting around like you're entitled to it." Her back straightened, and she met his stare head on. "You don't have the right to tell me I can't be here." He took a step closer, his hand lightly brushing the weapon on his belt, a move more calculated than casual. "Maybe I'll teach you a lesson about respecting the law," he said, his voice lowering with menace. Layla felt her heartbeat quicken, but her face remained composed, her resolve unshaken. She had fought too hard to let a man like this intimidate her. "I'm not breaking any laws," she replied, her tone steady. She didn't move to leave, and her words only seemed to fuel his anger. He smirked, leaning down to her level. "Think you're special, huh? Like you've got a pass? Because people like you can be dragged off any day." She met his eyes, unflinching, holding her silence, but her defiance seemed to enrage him further. Without warning, he shoved her shoulder, forcing her to stumble. "Get up," he barked. She felt anger rise, the years of resilience holding her in place. She wasn't about to let someone like him shake her. "You have no right to do that," she said, keeping her voice controlled, though her eyes held a fire. He laughed bitterly and grabbed her arm, yanking her up roughly. "Do you think anyone here is going to protect you?" As her arm twisted painfully in his grip, a voice from behind broke through. "Take your hands off her." Barnes turned, startled, his grip loosening as he faced a tall man in a dark coat, his voice calm but unwavering. "And who are you?" Barnes challenged, though there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. The man's gaze was steady. "Someone who won't stand by while you abuse your authority." Barnes sneered, but his grip on Layla loosened. "Just a misunderstanding, but I'd suggest you don't interfere with police business." The man didn't flinch. "And I'd suggest you reconsider what you call police business." Layla felt a wave of relief as Barnes backed off. "We'll remember this," Barnes said, his voice low, but he released her, casting a final, threatening glare before retreating to his patrol car. Her silent protector turned to her, his face softening. "Are you all right?" Layla nodded, trying to calm the rapid beating of her heart. "Thank you," she said. "I'm Jordan, and I think you might need legal support after that." Layla looked him in the eye, seeing both concern and resolve. "You're right," she said softly. "But I know what I'm up against." Just as the tension began to fade, another police car pulled up, and 2 more officers stepped out, their faces grim. "We need you to come with us," one officer said to Layla. Jordan moved to protest, but Layla raised a hand, calming him. "It's all right. I'll be fine." She took a deep breath as she stepped into the patrol car, its cold interior a harsh reminder of the reality she was about to face. Inside the police station, the fluorescent lights cast a sterile, unforgiving glow over the dull, cold walls. Layla was led to an interrogation room and instructed to sit, her hands trembling slightly as she placed them on the cold metal table. The adrenaline hadn't worn off yet, and she fought to keep her mind steady. She thought of all the challenges she'd overcome, each one building her strength for moments like this. When the door opened, Barnes walked in, his smirk barely concealed. "Think you won something out there?" he asked, his voice a hiss of suppressed anger. "I don't think I've won anything," she replied, her voice calm. "But I do think you're making a mistake." His smirk faltered slightly. She saw the flash of something behind his eyes, something like doubt. But he covered it quickly with a sneer. "You'll see soon enough who has the real power here," he said, his voice full of venom. Barnes was about to continue when the door opened again, and a woman in a sharp suit entered, her gaze fierce. "This interrogation is over." The officer blinked in surprise as the woman, with Jordan right behind her, stepped forward. "I'm Callie Rivers, her attorney, and this whole ordeal is about to become very public." Layla felt a surge of relief and strength. Callie looked at her with determination. "Let's get you out of here." As they walked out, Jordan turned to Layla, his face filled with resolve. "We'll file a lawsuit, Layla. This isn't going to be ignored." Layla nodded, the reality of the coming battle settling in. She knew she wasn't just fighting for herself, but for everyone who had ever been mistreated and silenced. The news spread fast, and headlines from "Billionaire Woman Takes on Corrupt Cop" to "Injustice Exposed in Elite Neighborhood" began flooding every media outlet. Layla sat in her office, looking out at the sprawling city below, aware of the responsibility now on her shoulders. The phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts, and she saw Jordan's name on the screen. "Layla," he said, his voice firm, "the support is overwhelming, but so is the backlash. There are people digging into your past, questioning your motives." Layla took a steadying breath. "I know, Jordan. This isn't new, but I'm not backing down." Just then, Callie entered her office, a thick folder in her hands and a steely look on her face. "Layla, we need to go over our strategy for the press conference. They'll try to trip you up, so stay focused." That afternoon, as Layla faced the crowd of reporters, camera flashes lit the room and murmurs filled the air. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every stare, but held her ground. "I'm here not just for myself," she began, her voice steady, "but for all those who've been denied justice." Questions came at her from every angle, some supportive, others veiled with doubt. One reporter challenged her motives directly, asking if she was simply seeking attention. Layla didn't hesitate. "I've earned my place," she answered firmly, "and this is not for attention, but for justice, for dignity." After the conference, she turned to Jordan and Callie, feeling the strength of their support. They moved forward with the lawsuit, and soon the courtroom became the new battlefield. Barnes sat at the defense table, his expression twisted with anger and disdain. But as each witness took the stand, a new layer of his abuse unraveled, painting a picture of a man unfit for his badge. Then came a surprise. Officer Gray, a fellow policeman, took the stand. "I've known Officer Barnes a long time," Gray began, his voice heavy, "and I've seen his actions. I stayed silent too long." Gray's testimony shifted the entire tone of the trial, his courage giving weight to Layla's story. Barnes's lawyer tried to challenge him, implying a personal vendetta, but Gray stood firm. "My motive is justice," he said, his words cutting through the room. Layla felt a surge of hope, seeing that the truth was starting to break through. The trial continued with tense arguments, each side presenting their case. But Callie was unyielding, countering every defense tactic with skill, bringing the truth back to the forefront. After long deliberations, the jury reached their verdict. When the foreman announced, "Guilty on all counts," a ripple of relief and satisfaction swept through the courtroom. Barnes sat still, shock and defeat written on his face. Outside, a crowd awaited Layla, their cheers filling the air as she stepped out. She took the microphone, her voice carrying over the crowd. "Today we've shown that justice isn't a privilege but a right," she said, her words a beacon for those who had supported her. She knew that she had started something bigger than herself, that this victory wasn't just hers. After the crowds dispersed, Jordan and Callie walked with her down the steps. "You did it, Layla," Jordan said, pride in his voice. She smiled, her resolve stronger than ever. "We did it," she replied, "but there's still work to do." With Callie's steady guidance, they set their sights on ensuring that the changes went beyond one courtroom, one case. Justice had to be more than just a fleeting victory. And as Layla looked out over the city that had tested her and tried to bring her down, she knew she was ready for whatever came next.